The film begins with a terrified young woman desperately trying to escape from something. She is badly injured and keeps nervously checking a bag filled with cash while holding a gun in her hand. Whatever happened before this moment has clearly left her frightened for her life. After driving for some distance, her car suddenly suffers a flat tire. With no other choice, she grabs the bag and the gun and continues on foot. But before she can get very far, a car speeding down the road crashes into her. The impact kills her instantly. The vehicle belongs to 4 friends who are on their way to a remote hunting cabin. Shocked by what has just happened, they quickly get out of the car and gather around the body. None of them know what to do next. While the others are focused on the dead girl, one of the friends, Paul, notices the bag lying nearby. When he opens it and sees the huge amount of money inside, his entire attitude changes. Paul excitedly tells the others that their lives are about to change forever. However, the rest of the group is far more concerned about the dead body lying in front of them. John immediately suggests taking the money and reporting everything to the police, but Paul strongly disagrees. He argues that the police will simply keep the money for themselves and possibly accuse them of murder. Hearing this, the others begin to hesitate. They are terrified of ending up in prison, and slowly, greed starts influencing their decisions as well. When one of them asks what they should do with the body, Paul comes up with a plan. He suggests driving to their hunting cabin, burying the girl's body somewhere deep in the forest, splitting the money among themselves, and never speaking about the incident again. The group reluctantly agrees. They place both the body and the money inside the car and prepare to leave. But just as they are about to drive away, a police vehicle arrives at the scene. Unknown to them, the officer is actually searching for the same girl. Realizing the danger, Paul tells everyone to remain calm and act normal. The officer first examines the girl's abandoned car before turning his attention toward the 4 friends. During the questioning, Paul confidently lies and claims they never saw any girl. He says their car suddenly broke down, forcing them to stop on the roadside. The officer finds this explanation suspicious because the vehicle appears to be brand new. When he asks how such a new car could malfunction, Paul simply says they have no idea. The officer remains unconvinced and decides to inspect the vehicle himself. At that moment, panic takes over Paul. He knows the officer will discover the dead body hidden inside the car. Desperate to protect himself, he grabs the girl's gun and points it directly at the policeman. His friends are horrified. They beg him to put the weapon down, and even the officer tries to calm him. But Paul has already crossed the line. Without hesitation, he pulls the trigger and kills the officer. The remaining friends are completely stunned. They cannot believe Paul has just murdered a police officer. But instead of showing regret, Paul immediately starts thinking about how to cover it up. He decides to leave the officer's body behind so investigators will assume the missing girl shot him before fleeing the area. With no better option, the group gets back into the car and heads toward the cabin. Eventually, they arrive at a remote location surrounded by dense forest. The place is isolated, with no one around for miles. John is deeply disturbed by everything that has happened and barely speaks to anyone. Meanwhile, the other 2 friends begin digging a large pit in the forest, preparing to bury the girl's body and hide the terrible crime forever. While the others worked on hiding the evidence, Paul sat inside the cabin and began counting the money. His plan was simple. Once everything settled down, the cash would be divided equally among the 4 friends. At least that was what he claimed. Meanwhile, John called his wife to reassure her. She immediately complained that she had been trying to reach him all day and that he had ignored every one of her calls. Trying to sound normal, John told her that he was fine and would return home after the hunting trip. But deep down, he knew nothing about this trip was normal anymore. Elsewhere, a mysterious man named Sidney arrives at the location where the girl's car had been abandoned. He carefully inspects the area and notices a large amount of blood on the ground. The car is empty, but the blood tells him everything he needs to know. Following the trail, he heads straight toward the cabin. Back at the cabin, the 4 friends are shocked when Sidney suddenly appears. Paul immediately demands to know who he is. Calmly, Sidney tells them that they have something that belongs to him, the bag of money. He says all he wants is his bag back, and if they return it, he will leave without causing any trouble. The friends are stunned. They cannot understand how this stranger managed to find them in the middle of nowhere. Suspicious, Paul points a gun at him and orders one of his friends to search him. But surprisingly, Sidney is carrying no weapons at all. Even then, Sidney remains completely calm. He repeats that he only wants his bag and promises to leave if they hand it over. Paul starts questioning him, wanting to know how he found them and whether anyone else knows where they are. Sidney responds by saying that he may not know about anyone else, but he knows everything about them. In fact, he knows far more than they realize. His confidence makes everyone uneasy. Despite being surrounded and threatened, he shows no fear, no anger, and no sign of panic. Suddenly, strange noises echo through the forest nearby. The group immediately assumes Sidney has armed men hiding in the woods. To investigate, John and another friend grab their guns and head into the forest. Meanwhile, Paul continues questioning Sidney. He asks how many men are waiting outside. Sidney insists that he came alone, but Paul refuses to believe him. Just to be safe, he drags Sidney into the basement and ties him up. Out in the forest, John and his friend discover several animal traps hidden among the trees. While examining them, they spot a local man nearby. The moment the man sees the guns in their hands, he becomes terrified and starts running. The two friends chase him down, catch him, and bring him back to the cabin. Paul immediately begins interrogating him, demanding to know where his companions are hiding. But the frightened man has no idea what they are talking about. Trembling with fear, he explains that he lives nearby with his wife and daughter. He begs them to let him go home, insisting that he has done nothing wrong. His fear is genuine, and it becomes obvious that he is telling the truth. John takes one look at the terrified man and says he does not believe he is involved in any of this. But Paul sees the situation differently. He argues that the man has already seen all of them. If he reaches the police, every one of them could end up behind bars. That is when Paul makes another horrifying decision. He says the man must be killed. However, this time he refuses to do it himself. Instead, he tells one of the others to pull the trigger. Reluctantly, one of John's friends agrees. He raises the gun and points it at the innocent man. The terrified victim falls to his knees and desperately begs for his life. But as the friend looks into the man's eyes, he finds himself unable to shoot. But before he can lower the gun, Paul points his own weapon at him and forces him to shoot. Left with no choice, John's friend pulls the trigger, killing the innocent man on the spot. The moment it happens, he freezes in shock, unable to accept that he has just taken a life. While John begins disposing of the bodies, Paul returns to Sidney in the basement. Sidney calmly tells him that he killed an innocent man even though he knew the man had done nothing wrong. Then he adds something that disturbs Paul deeply. According to Sidney, Paul is no longer doing all this just to save himself. He is slowly beginning to enjoy hunting people, almost like an addiction. Paul is shaken by Sidney's words, but he tries not to show it. When John comes inside, Sidney warns all of them one final time. He tells them to return his money and he will leave the place quietly. One of Paul's friends suggests giving Sidney a share of the money so they can end the matter, but Paul refuses immediately. Sidney also makes it clear that he does not want a share. Either he takes the entire bag or he takes nothing. Hearing this, Paul loses patience and points the gun at Sidney's head. But Sidney remains calm and quietly says that Paul cannot kill him. Then he suddenly mentions California and asks why Paul has never told his friends about what happened there. Paul is completely shocked. He asks Sidney how he knows about that incident. John also becomes suspicious and asks what happened in California. At first, Paul tries to avoid the topic, but eventually he reveals the truth. A year earlier, Paul had gone to California for a business trip where he met a woman. According to him, she came with him willingly, but the next morning she threatened to accuse him of rape unless he paid her money. After a heated argument, Paul killed her in anger. Then he cut her body into pieces and disposed of it. This means Paul had already committed murder before this night. His friends are horrified and cannot believe he was capable of something so brutal. Paul tries to justify himself, saying he panicked and did everything only to save his own life. Meanwhile, John's friend becomes consumed by guilt and anger. He storms into the basement, points a gun at Paul, and says that because of him, he was forced to kill an innocent man. Now he deeply regrets it. But Paul reminds him that he was the one who volunteered to shoot the man. Hearing this, John's friend is stunned for a moment. Taking advantage of that hesitation, Paul snatches the gun from him and begins beating him. John and the other friend try to stop Paul, but he refuses to calm down. Finally, one of them strikes Paul on the head with a gun, knocking him unconscious. When Paul wakes up, He finds himself tied up in the basement with Sydney. Upstairs, John and his friend discuss what to do with the money. John says they should hide it somewhere in the forest until they find a proper solution, because ever since the bag came into their lives, they have completely lost their humanity. In the basement, Sydney begins provoking Paul again. He tells him that his friend has probably taken the money and run away, and that Paul may no longer be part of their plan. Fueled by anger and suspicion, Paul manages to break free and rushes after John. But before he can do anything, John's friend shoots him. Paul collapses to the ground, and they believe he is dead. Overwhelmed by guilt, John's friend goes back to the basement and starts crying. Sydney coldly asks what the point of crying is now. He reminds him that he did not want to kill the innocent man, but he killed him anyway. Now he has also shot his own friend. Sydney asks whether he truly believes crying will erase his crimes. Meanwhile, John enters the forest and finds a hollow tree. He hides the bag of money inside it, hoping to keep it away from everyone until they figure out what to do. After some time, Paul opens his eyes. The bullet has only hit his shoulder and he is still alive. Realizing that his friends have turned against him, he quietly hides behind a tree and waits for his chance. Back in the basement, Sydney asks John's friend whether he truly trusts John. The friend says yes, but Sydney continues planting doubt in his mind. He tells him that they all think this money will improve their lives, but the truth is, this money has never brought anything good to anyone. The friend tells Sydney to keep quiet, but Sydney calmly repeats that if they give him his money, he will let them leave alive. Still, the friend refuses to understand the danger they are in. As John returns to the cabin, Paul suddenly steps in front of him and points a gun at him. He orders John to take him to the bag, threatening to shoot him if he refuses. Seeing no other choice, John drops his gun. John tells Paul that he is tired of everything that has happened. If Paul wants the money, he will take him to it. But as they walk through the forest, John cleverly leads him toward the area where the animal traps are hidden. Suddenly, Paul's leg gets caught in one of the traps. He screams in pain, begging for help. But instead of saving him, John picks up his gun and runs back to the cabin. When John reaches the cabin, he tells his friends everything. After hearing it, one of them says Paul is still their friend and they cannot just leave him in the forest to die. At that moment, Sydney speaks again and tells them they still have a chance to survive. All they have to do is return his money. But when Paul's friend starts threatening him again, Sydney says he knows everything about him too, including how he has been betraying his own friends. Before Sydney can reveal anything more, Paul's friend shoots him directly in the head. But immediately after the gunshot, a strange sound begins echoing through the cabin. The sound is so painful that everyone starts screaming and covering their ears. After some time, the group heads toward the place where John hid the money. Unknown to them, Paul has managed to survive and is secretly following them. On the way, he finds John's gun and keeps it with him. As they continue walking, John asks his friend if he is hiding something from him. His friend finally admits the truth. He says he is sorry, but he has been having a relationship with John's wife. John is devastated. In anger, he says he did so much for him, but he and his wife betrayed him together. This affair had been going on for a long time, yet his friend never told him the truth. Furious, John points his gun at his friend's head. For a moment, it looks like he might shoot him, but he stops himself. Instead, he says they will take the money and leave, and after that, he never wants to see his face again. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Sydney suddenly opens his eyes. This reveals the shocking truth. He is not human at all, because even after being shot in the head, he is still alive. In the forest, the three men reach the hollow tree where John hid the money. One of them says they should go back and help Paul, but Paul's friend coldly says they should forget him because he is probably already dead. Just then, Paul appears from hiding and shoots him dead. He had been silently watching them the whole time. Seeing this, John and his remaining friend quickly take cover behind a tree. John's friend tries to calm Paul down. He tells him they are still friends and that they were coming to rescue him. Then he says he will throw away his gun and come out, asking Paul to do the same. Paul refuses and tells him to come out first. John warns his friend not to trust Paul, but the friend believes him and steps out with the money bag in his hand. But suddenly, he sees Sydney standing behind Paul. Shocked to see Sydney alive, he freezes completely, and the bag falls from his hand. Paul does not understand what his friend is staring at. In that confusion, he panics and shoots him. Now only Paul and John are left alive. Sydney then drags the dying man toward a tree. Using an injection, he begins drawing blood from him to feed himself. This finally reveals what Sydney truly is. He is a vampire. As John's friend takes his final breaths, Sydney explains the real meaning behind everything. He says humans are no different from dogs. If a piece of meat is thrown between dogs, they fight against their own kind. With humans, the only difference is that their meat is money. Animals chase food, and humans chase wealth. Sydney says he threw money among them, and within hours they forgot friendship, loyalty, and humanity. In the end, it becomes clear that Sydney created this entire situation to test them. He has been doing the same thing for many years, watching greed destroy people from the inside. Meanwhile, the moment John peeks out from behind the tree, Paul shoots him. Paul believes John is dead, but John is still barely alive. Thinking the danger is over, Paul walks toward the bag of money. But before he can take it, John uses his last strength to fire back. The bullet hits Paul and kills him on the spot. However, John is also badly injured and slowly dying. At that moment, Sydney appears beside him. Instead of letting him die, Sydney makes John drink his blood. Sydney tells him this is a gift. From now on, John will become immortal and will never die. Then he says humans are greedy creatures who can do anything for their own benefit. And because of that greed, he is giving John a new life. After saying this, Sydney leaves the place with the bag of money and the gun. The next morning, Sydney places the money bag back inside the dead girl's car. A few moments later, the same girl walks toward the vehicle. This reveals the shocking truth. She never died that day. Just like Sydney, she is also immortal. The girl takes the bag and begins the same work she and Sydney have been doing for years. They use money to test humans, hunt them, and collect blood for themselves. Later, 2 more people discover the bag filled with money. As soon as they see it, greed appears in their eyes. This makes it clear that they are about to become Sydney's next victims. Finally, John is also shown alive. After drinking Sydney's blood, he too has become a vampire and gained immortality. Now he has joined Sydney's endless mission of testing human greed. And with this dark twist, the story comes to an end.